All right, so we're doing a tomato review on the Sweet 100 tomato. Okay, so this tomato is very similar to the Sweet 1 Million, except the Sweet 1 Million will put out a bract that will get 10 times as long as this bract. And it'll hang all the way down to the ground and put out tomatoes. Now the Sweet 100 will maybe put out a bract that might put out like 16 tomatoes on it or something like that. And generally that's usually about as far as you can get with it. Whereas the Sweet 1 Million will put out a bract that will get maybe 20 or 30 tomatoes on it. So it's really an interesting tomato. But this is not the modified version, which is the Million, the Sweet 1 Million. This is the Sweet 100, which is close enough. It's very similar to the Sweet 1 Million. The same kind of tomato, same size. It's just this one doesn't get the bract that's going to get as long as the Sweet 1 Million. But I've grown this now for a couple years, and it seems like it grows pretty good every year for me. And every year I grow it, it gets more and more adapted to the environment and grows better and better. So you're going to have to tolerate for the first 2 to 3 years growing this tomato until this plant just suddenly starts taking off in your environment. And then once it does, it'll resist the disease. It'll grow rapidly and very heavily and produce very quickly. And so you need to get past the first 2 or 3 years with these tomatoes, at least with this one, before you start really seeing those long stringers come out with those, large amount of tomatoes on them without being attacked by bugs and disease and all that. So you're going to have to grow it for a few years and get it acclimated to your environment. And once it does, then it'll do really good. Now, this plant was knocked over a couple times by the wind. Just want to make a note of that. And every time it knocks over, it knocks a whole bunch of tomatoes all over my driveway, which I end up picking up and bringing inside, or the squirrels or the chipmunks get them. And so it's been getting knocked down. My plants have really been getting the life beat out of them hard this year by the weather. So I'm lucky to even have what I have at this point. But I do get enough tomatoes we can cut them open and taste test them. Now, I have done a couple taste tests on this tomato, and they're absolutely gorgeous. I'll pick one for you. Generally, that's what it looks like. And so, that's it. Here's a look at the leaf. We showed you the bract. I believe it's a Solanum lycopersicum, if I'm not mistaken. And that's really it. If you leave this tomato grow wild and not inside of a pail, like if you grew it out in a big 10 by 10 square patch of soil and just let it go completely crazy, you would get thousands of tomatoes off it. It's because I'm growing it in a pail is really going to shorten its production life, and it don't grow as good because it can't root at multiple nodes and then start to pull up resources from those node points where it throws down roots. So if you put this thing inside of a 10 by 10 raised bed and you just put this plant by itself in there, this plant will go absolutely enormous and put out thousands of tomatoes for you. So if you got the room to grow it that way, that is the way I would recommend growing this type of tomato, because you'll literally get wheelbarrows full of these tomatoes. And it's a great market tomato because you can take those little plastic containers, fill them up and bring them loaded up to your market and sell them, $3, $2 a pop. You'll make a fortune with these tomatoes. This is definitely the tomato you'd want to grow for that. All right, so I'll see you at the bench. Okay, so this is the taste test part of the review for the Sweet 100 tomato. Now, I did a review last year on this tomato, and I really liked the tomato a lot. I think this is one of those varieties of tomatoes that I think I'm going to grow every year because I really love these tomatoes, and I'm very big on small tomatoes because I like to snack a lot on tomatoes as I'm in my garden and I'm going through my yard and that kind of a thing. Whereas big tomatoes like this, you got to make a meal out of it. And I try not to make meals. I like to eat constantly when it comes to this time of the year. So I'm constantly eating vegetables and fruits out of my garden. I'm not just sitting down preparing meals. Though I do sit down and prepare meals, I prefer to forage and eat a lot of these smaller tomatoes. They don't fill me up, but they give me just enough to take the edge of your hunger off, and I'm good for a couple of hours. Go back out, eat a few more, takes the edge of hunger off. I can do that all day, and I can do that eating tomatoes. I absolutely love these cherry tomatoes. But this is one of those tomatoes I really like growing. I like the profile of the plant. I like the way everything's growing. But with this one tomato, one thing I don't like about it, and as you can see here, you can see it cracked. This is one of the few cherry tomatoes that cracked. So none of my other cherry tomatoes are getting cracks in them, unless it's, you know, literally raining every single day, an inch of rain every day. I mean, you might get, but most of my cherry tomatoes, those size, smaller size tomatoes, generally I did not get any cracks on them. So this is one of the few that did get cracks, and I'm not sure why it's getting cracks like that. I know it's getting a lot of rain and stuff like that, but it really shouldn't be getting cracks. But it did. So that's not a big deal, and not every tomato did it. Just certain ones, maybe it was overripe. I mean, I really left these on there much longer than I probably should have. And I did that so I can get a little batch of them ready all at once and for the video and everything. But normally I would be picking these tomatoes off the plant every single day as I go through the day until I, you know, eat all my tomatoes. And of course I do keep a certain amount for seeds, but these tomatoes, you know, they did have some cracking, and I will be eating them on a daily basis. But anyway, now this tomato, I believe, is a Solanum lycopersicum. I should have double checked that. I forgot to look it up. But I believe it's a Solanum lycopersicum. It's an indeterminate tomato. It's a regular leaf tomato, and it's a cherry tomato, and that's basically all there is to know about it. I don't know any of its background history, who bred the tomato, where did it come from, what country is it originally from. I mean, I don't really have any of those details. I look it up basically online. If I can't find it on the first 1 or 2 pages of Google search, and I'm just, you know, I can't spend hours of time. I got dozens upon dozens of varieties of tomatoes to do videos on, and I can't just spend that much time on each variety. If it comes up on the first page, and I try to put something together. And if I can find something on this as I go through making the video, I'll add it in the description. Just look below, you'll see whatever details I can find on the Sweet 100 tomato. So anyway, here's a look at the inside of it. That's what it looks like on the inside. I believe it's bichambered. And this is just a good example of what it looks like in general. It looks like a nice, rich colored, red, tightly formed cherry tomato. Very beautiful tomato. I love this tomato. Alright, so we're going to give it a taste test right now. But before I do that, I want to give you the Brix reading over here. I like doing these Brix readings now because they give me a real accurate reading, and it really gets me going for anticipation of what to expect once I eat it. So, okay, that's a 9 on the Brix. So these are going to be relatively pretty sweet. Let's give it a go. Okay, so right off the bat, the insides, when they're really ripe, they get soft, really inside, but the skins are really tough. That might be why these are cracking. The other ones I don't normally have that kind of problem with, but the skins are really tough, so you're going to have to spit them out. Not a big deal. I mean, if you're in the yard, you just eat them, you spit the skins out. But I mean, if you're going to walk around in public thinking, oh, I'm going to pop these in as I'm walking around shopping, you're going to be spitting these things all over the sidewalk. Alright, so the flavor profile. The sweetness is like a 40 on it. It's really high in sweetness. I mean, the sugar, even though I know what the Brix said it was 9, but that's the way the sugar attacks your tongue is really bright. It's a very bright and quick flash of sugar. The tangy part of it, I would say it's kind of on the low side. I'm going to say not low, but the sugar overpowers it literally. It's like eating. It's like picture it like this. Take tomato sauce and just start dumping sugar into your tomato sauce. And then taste the tomato sauce with a ton of sugar in it. That's what it's like. It's a very, very sugary tomato. It's a great snacking tomato. I'm assuming that it would make a great sauce tomato. But the tangy part, I'm going to guesstimate and say the tangy flavor of it roughly, I'd probably say around maybe 32. It's not quite 35 and it's not quite 30, but it's like a little over 30. But it's not, you know what I mean? It's not a heavy accent of tang. But then there's a tomato flavor in there, and it's got a kind of a funny earthy tone to it. And I'm going to try to describe that earthy tone. Yeah, there's no way you can eat those skins unless you want to sit there for like a minute chewing that thing. It's got a slight earthy tone. If I was to compare it to a tomato, or an anti-comparisons to a tomato, like the black cherry, you don't get any kind of earthy tones or anything. You get this beautiful contrasted tomato. The same thing with the chocolate sprinkles tomato. I just did a review on that. Every aspect of that tomato was perfect. This is nothing like that. This has a very earthy type of tone. It's got a very rustic, heirloom, wild tomato flavor. Okay, I've tasted a lot of tomatoes, and a lot of the wild tomatoes tend to have this earthy tone to them, which isn't bad. It's part of growing wild tomatoes. This kind of has that effect to it. So somewhere along the line, the genetics of this tomato must have came from a wild variety that they must have crossed over to it. But you can taste that in the tomato. But the sweetness kind of really overpowers that. So you don't have to worry about getting skunked out or anything by funky tones in your tomato. But the aftertaste really kind of delivers after you swallow it. You get a nice aftertaste of the tomato. It wants to draw you back into the tomato. And then it kind of fades away and you're good. You always got a little bit on the very back part of your tongue. It kind of hangs out for a few minutes. It's a very nice tomato. I really, really like this tomato. The one thing that I have noticed on some of my tomatoes this year, not very bad. No insect damages or anything like that. The one problem I was having with the one insect that seems to be bothering my tomato plants are squash bugs, which is very unusual because I've never seen squash bugs really on my tomato plants bothering my tomatoes before. This is the first year I've seen squash bugs suddenly appearing out of nowhere attacking my tomato plants. Usually you see squash bugs on a lot of other plants, cucumbers and other plants. But this year I'm seeing a few of them on my tomato plants, and it only takes one squash bug to go around and do some damage. And I'll see if I got one of these tomatoes that have like a squash bug bite. What they do is they stick their little nose in there, they poke a hole through that skin, they start sucking the juice out. But they don't just suck the juice out, they squirt their saliva into it to melt it down and then suck that pre-digested saliva down. That tomato is ruined. And if you don't know you got a squash bug bite in your tomato and you pop that thing in your mouth, you get a little bit of a gross experience. And I did do that once or twice, and I realized that, yeah, I hit one of those squash bugs. And I think some of the ones that I did pick, I just chuck them. I don't even hold on to them because I don't want to accidentally eat them. I should save the seeds from them, but I just want them out of there because I'm doing these taste tests right now, and you might accidentally eat them easily. But that was the only other problem I had with most of my tomatoes, but even with this one, it seemed like they were going after this tomato quite a bit. Might be because of that high contrast of sugar that's in there. They can sense that sugar and it brings them out of the woodwork. So outside of that, this tomato plant did really good this year. I'm going to try to get a second harvest out of this. So I got to trim the plants down. I'll do a video on that when I get to that point. I'm going to basically show you how I prune the plant basically down to its lowest form, and then I bring the plant back up from new shoots, and hopefully I can get a good run right into October. Now these are in pails, so I can bring them in if it gets down below freezing, or I can put them in my greenhouse. So I do have that option to move them in and out of my garage during that time of the year. So I might be able to squeeze out October, but great tomato to grow. I highly recommend growing this tomato. If you don't like really sweet tomatoes, this may not be for you. All right, some people really don't like sweet tomatoes. Some people like sweet tomatoes. Some people don't like tangy tomatoes. But this is going to be a sweet one. That's why it's named Sweet 100. So be ready for it when you eat it. It's going to be very sweet. You can probably make a great ketchup out of this thing. It's a great tomato. So that's it. That's your tomato review for the Sweet 100. Like, share, and subscribe, and I'll see you on the next one.